So this is, I suppose, a walk and talk. The first time I've seen one was Amendum. He's kind of an atheist philosopher. And anyways, so this particular video is related to exponential governance in connection to the Ethereum cryptocurrency 2.0 sort of system. So why exponential? So the Ethereum system seems to allow for something called smart contracts. And a smart contract is essentially a legally binding contract connected to cryptocurrencies. And it does this through the blockchain. And if you don't know what the blockchain is, there's plenty of information on it on the web. But the neat thing about this, of course, is that things like voting can take place potentially, very much augmenting the nature of our present day governance structure. In other words, if we could facilitate it, not to say that we could, but if we could, things like voting on some sort of referendum issue, such as whether or not we ought to have a train station in a particular city, people that are directly affected by this could seemingly vote on it with it costing essentially nothing to hold the referendum. This process really dramatically, it seems, could create the potential of for example, the costs of governance to dramatically shrink. The high levels of taxations that we presently experience could be deeply diminished. One of the things that I hope to see potentially, and maybe you might too, integrated into something like Ethereum. Now, Ethereum might not be the system in which this really takes hold, but it seems to be both the leader and the greatest potential at this time for smart contracts, cryptocurrency 2.0. Anyways, what as I was saying, one of the most potentially greatest things is this voting system that it seems to create the grounds for. And a methodology that I've been thinking about, this is integrating this system with some sorts of philosophical frameworks, is the notion of having these smart contracts based potentially on technical skills. I've heard people in the Ethereum space talk about that. That is to say that, if this voting system was implemented, those with more technical experience maybe ought to get more vote. That in some ways is counterintuitive to something like a decentralization process, as we think that, ranking is undesirable. But in this sense, pure democracy might not be quite as good as having some sorts of technical expertise having more say. Another way of actually perhaps looking at this and going forward with this is having some sorts of developmental psychological maps overlaid onto voting power. That is to say that, people that have more developmental complexity, more integrative thinking, perhaps might get a little bit more vote than those that don't. This can be looked at through many different developmental maps. Roughly speaking, it seems that we go from something like a magical thinking when we're really young. That is to say, if I dance, it'll bring rain, to more of a mythos-based thinking, to more rational and pluralistic and perhaps integrative thinking. So, that is to say that perhaps the voting structure ought to accommodate for that, providing both still a democratizing process of allowing people to still get some say in things, but those with more technical / generalized knowledge perhaps get a little bit more say. So, in essence, this notion of exponential politics risks on sort of the nature of exponential technologies that we do see accelerating in the world space. That is to say that processing speed doubles every 2 years. These sorts of things. There has been a lag, it seems, to some major degree in things like politics, in that sense, in which we still have a lot of 17th century style political structuring, and it hasn't yet caught up to the potentialities that we see through the innovations in technology and so forth. And things like Ethereum seem to allow for that potential to be actualized in a very exciting way. Be well.